Imagine waking up and discovering that 100,000 reais have appeared in your bank account out of nowhere. No warning, no explanation, just the money sitting there, waiting for you. Now imagine that this happened to everyone in your city. Every single person you know woke up a millionaire on the same day. Sounds too good to be true, right? Because that's exactly what happened in a small town, and what came next was something no one could have predicted. Before I tell this insane story, let me give you some context. We're talking about a town called San Pedro, a quiet little place with around 15,000 residents. Nothing special ever happened there. People worked, lived normal lives, paid their bills. It was the kind of town where everyone knows everyone, you know? The kind of place where news spreads in minutes. It was an ordinary Monday, 6 in the morning, when Maria, a 42-year-old school teacher, checked her banking app before leaving for work. She almost dropped her phone. Her account balance, which had been 1,200 reais the previous Friday, now showed 101,200 reais. She blinked several times, closed the app, opened it again. The number was still there. Her heart started racing. Was it real? Was it some kind of scam? She immediately called the bank, but the line was busy. While Maria was trying to understand what was happening, on the other side of town, Carlos, a 35-year-old mechanic, was having the exact same experience. He had gone to an ATM to withdraw 50 reais for breakfast when he saw the statement, an extra 100,000 reais in his account. He printed the receipt, stuffed it in his pocket, and ran home. On the way, he ran into his neighbor Jose, who looked pale, holding his phone with trembling hands. "You too?" Jose asked. "To what?" Carlos replied, pretending not to know. "The money, man. It showed up in my account." In less than 2 hours, the entire town was in chaos. Social media exploded. WhatsApp groups went crazy. Everyone, absolutely everyone who had an account at that specific bank, the Central Bank of the Interior, a small regional bank, had received exactly 100,000 reais. Young people, elderly people, children with joint accounts, business owners, unemployed residents, it didn't matter. The money had arrived for everyone. The bank branch in San Pedro turned into total chaos. Hundreds of people gathered outside before it even opened. When the doors finally opened at 9 in the morning, the bank manager, Mrs. Patricia, a 58-year-old woman who had worked there for 30 years, was immediately surrounded. She had also seen the money in her own account, and she was just as confused as everyone else. "Please, stay calm," she shouted, trying to control the crowd. "I've already contacted the head office. They're investigating. This is definitely a system error." But people didn't want to hear about errors. They wanted answers. Some wanted to withdraw the money immediately before it disappeared. Others were worried about whether using the money would be a crime. And then there were those who were already making plans on how to spend it. Around noon, the official confirmation came. A statement from the bank admitted that yes, a serious technical error had occurred during a system update early Sunday morning. A wrong line of code had been inserted, and instead of processing normal transfers, the system had deposited 100,000 reais into every active account linked to the San Pedro branch. The statement asked for calm and said the error would be reversed within 48 hours. But this is where the story really gets interesting. Because when the people of San Pedro found out the money would be taken back, something changed. A meeting was called in the main square that same night. More than 3,000 people showed up, and someone asked a question that changed everything. What if we don't give it back? Silence. Everyone looked at the man who had spoken. It was Roberto, a local lawyer known for being a bit controversial. He continued, "Think about it. The bank made the mistake, not us. We didn't ask for this money. We didn't steal it. We didn't do anything illegal. The money just appeared, and now they want us to calmly let them take it back without even a decent apology?" Murmurs spread through the crowd. Roberto had touched a nerve. San Pedro wasn't a wealthy town. Many families struggled. Minimum wage barely covered basic expenses. And now, for a brief moment, Everyone had experienced what it felt like to actually have money in their account. They can't just take the money like that, not without a legal process. If they try to force a reversal, they could be violating our rights. I propose that we resist, that we force them to negotiate. The idea was absurd, completely crazy, but at that moment, with 100,000 reais shining on everyone's bank statements, it didn't seem so absurd. An informal vote was held right there, and by a surprisingly large margin, most people decided they would not make it easy for the bank to recover the money. Over the next 24 hours, something incredible happened. Nearly 80% of San Pedro's residents withdrew as much money as they could. Some managed to withdraw 20,000, others 30,000, depending on their account limits. Many transferred money to friends and family at other banks. Some bought cars, others paid off old debts. One family bought a house outright. A group of young people bought equipment to set up a music studio. The bank went into full panic mode. They tried to freeze the accounts, but it was too late. Millions of reais had already left the system. The bank's president, Mr. Augusto, a 65-year-old man who had never set foot in San Pedro, was forced to come to the town personally to negotiate. He arrived on Thursday, 4 days after the error. Another meeting was called in the main square, this time with him on a makeshift stage. About 5,000 people showed up to hear what he had to say. The tension in the air was palpable. "Good morning, citizens of San Pedro. I came here personally to apologize for the mistake our bank made. It was a serious technical failure, and we take full responsibility." Some people booed. Others stayed silent, waiting to hear what came next. "However," he continued, "I must be clear. This money does not belong to you. It was a mistake, and you have a legal obligation to return what is not yours. If you do not return it voluntarily, we will be forced to take legal action." Roberto, the lawyer, climbed onto the stage without being invited. Mr. Augusto looked uncomfortable but didn't try to stop him. "Legal action," Roberto said into the microphone. "Let's talk about legality then. Your bank deposited this money into our accounts. This wasn't a robbery, it wasn't fraud, it was an error in your system. And for 4 days, you did nothing to fix it while the money was there. Many people here used that money in good faith, believing it was legitimately theirs." The crowd applauded. Mr. Augusto turned red. "Furthermore," Roberto continued, "this bank has operated in San Pedro for 40 years. How much profit have you taken from our town in that time? How many abusive fees? How many loans with outrageous interest rates? Maybe this is a kind of poetic justice." The crowd went wild. Mr. Augusto tried to regain control, but it was clear he had lost the audience. He left the square escorted by security under a rain of boos. But the situation was more complicated than it seemed, because while many people in San Pedro were celebrating, some residents were genuinely worried. Mrs. Anna, a 70-year-old woman who had lived her entire life honestly, couldn't sleep at night. She had received the 100,000 like everyone else, but she hadn't touched the money. To her, it was simple. It wasn't hers. Taking it would be theft. "I don't care what others do," she said in an interview with a local newspaper, "but I won't die with that weight on my conscience. The money isn't mine, and I'm going to return it, even if it's the last thing I do." She wasn't alone. A small group of people, about 15% of the population, returned the money voluntarily. They were called fools by some, saints by others. The town was divided. Meanwhile, the bank began applying real pressure. They filed lawsuits against everyone who hadn't returned the money, hundreds of lawsuits, all at once. The courts of San Pedro, which normally handled maybe 20 cases a month, suddenly had 10,000 new cases. It was impossible to manage. The lawyers of San Pedro, including Roberto, joined forces to form a collective defense. They argued that the bank had been negligent, that it hadn't taken proper measures to prevent the error, and that many people had used the money in good faith, believing it was legitimate. They asked that the bank absorb the loss as a consequence of its own mistake. The case gained national attention. Journalists from across the country went to San Pedro. TV shows debated the issue. Banking law experts were divided. Some said the money had to be returned in full. Others argued the bank bore part of the blame for not acting quickly enough. While the lawsuits dragged on, life in San Pedro changed in strange ways. Some people who had withdrawn large amounts began living differently. New cars appeared on the streets, houses were renovated, new businesses opened. But there was also a dark side. Relationships were destroyed over disagreements about money, families were divided, friends of decades stopped speaking to each other. Maria, the teacher who had been one of the first to discover the money, used 40,000 reals to pay off her house and car debts. She didn't regret it, but she didn't feel completely at peace either. I needed that money. I was drowning in debt. When I saw that chance, I took it. Maybe it was wrong, but it saved my financial life. Carlos, the mechanic, bought new equipment for a shop. He argued that he had invested the money in something productive, something that would generate income and jobs. I didn't waste it. I used it to improve my business. That benefits the whole town. Months passed. The lawsuits moved slowly. The bank was losing money every day, not just from the erroneous deposits, but also from astronomical legal costs. And this is where the twist happened that no one expected. After 8 months of legal battles, the bank made a settlement offer. They offered to forgive 50% of the amount if people returned the other 50%. In other words, anyone who had received 100,000 and still had some of the money could return half and keep the other half with no legal consequences. The proposal divided San Pedro even more. Some saw it as a victory. The bank was essentially admitting partial fault by forgiving half the debt. Others thought it was a trap and believed they should continue resisting until the bank gave up completely. Roberto, the lawyer, surprisingly recommended that people accept the deal. Honestly, we got way more than I expected. The bank could have been much more aggressive. This deal is better than risking losing everything in court. In the end, about 60% of the people who still had the money accepted the deal. They returned half and kept half. 30% continued resisting, betting that the bank would eventually give up. And 10% had spent everything and had no way to return anything. 2 years after the initial error, lawsuits were still ongoing against those who refused the settlement. Some lost and were forced to return everything, plus fines and interest. Others dragged the cases out so long that the bank, tired of spending money, eventually dropped some of them. Today, San Pedro is a different town. Some residents kept enough money to change their lives. Others lost everything and are still paying the consequences. The Central Bank of the Interior branch closed its doors 2 years after the incident. They simply couldn't recover financially from the loss. But the question remains, who was right? Those who returned the money immediately because it wasn't theirs? Those who fought to keep at least part of it because they believed the bank should pay for its mistake? Or those who spent everything and regret nothing? Mrs. Anna, the 70-year-old woman who voluntarily returned everything, still sleeps well at night. Money comes and goes, but a clean conscience lasts forever. On the other hand, Maria managed to get out of debt and now lives a much calmer financial life. "I did what I had to do," she said without remorse. The truth is, there's no easy answer. The San Pedro banking error exposed something about human nature, about morality, about what's right and wrong when the law is unclear and circumstances are extraordinary. Each person had to make their own choice and live with the consequences. What's undeniable is that for a brief moment, an entire town had the chance to experience what it felt like to truly have money. And even though many eventually lost it, that moment permanently changed how they saw the world, the banking system, and even themselves. Some say San Pedro was never the same again. The divisions created by the money incident still exist. There are people who still don't speak to each other because of decisions made during those chaotic days. But there are also positive stories, businesses that were created with the money and survived, families that paid off debts and managed to start over. In the end, San Pedro became a bizarre and fascinating example of what happens when a system error collides with human need, greed, morality, and the gray area between what is legal and what is right. and everyone who lived through that experience will carry their own version of the story forever. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel for more crazy stories like this.